Chapter 11. I arrived in Memphis on a cold November Sunday morning in 1925 and lugged my suitcase down quiet, empty sidewalks through winter sunshine. I found Beale Street, the street that I had been told was filled with danger, pickpockets, prostitutes, cutthroats, and black confidence men. After walking several blocks, I saw a big frame house with a sign in the window, "Rooms." I slowed, wondering if it was a rooming house or a whorehouse. I had heard of the foolish blunders that small-town boys made when they went to big cities, and I wanted to be very cautious. I walked past the house to the end of the block, then turned and walked slowly past it again. Well, whatever it was, I would stay in it for a day or two, until I found something I was certain of. I had nothing valuable in my suitcase. My money was strapped to my body. In order for anyone to get it, they would have to kill me. I walked up the steps and was about to ring the bell when I saw a big mulatto woman staring at me through the window. Oh, hell, I thought. This is a whorehouse. I stopped. The woman smiled. I turned around and went back down the walk. As I neared the street, I looked back in time to see the woman's face leave the window. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway. "Come here, boy," she called to me. I hesitated. God damn, I've run into a whore right off. "Come here, boy," she commanded loudly. "I'm not going to hurt you." I turned and walked slowly toward her. "Come inside." I stared at her a moment, then stepped into a warm hallway. The woman smiled, turned on a light, and looked at me from my head to my feet. "How come you was walking past this house so many times?" "I was looking for a room." "Didn't you see the sign?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then how come you didn't come in?" "Well, I don't know. You see, I'm a stranger here." "Lord, and don't I know it." She dropped heavily into a chair and went into a gale of laughter that made her big bosom shake as though it were going to fly off. "Anybody could tell that." She gasped, giggled, and grew quiet. She said, "I'm Mrs. Moss." I told her my name. "That's a real nice name," she said after a moment's serious thought. I blinked. What the hell kind of place was this? And who was this woman? I stood with my suitcase in my hand, poised to leave. "Boy, Lord, this ain't no whorehouse. Folks get the craziest notions about Beale Street. I own this place. This is my home. I'm a church member. I got a daughter 17 years old. And by God, I sure make her walk a straight chalk line. Sit down, son. You're in safe hands here." I laughed and sat. "Where might you be from?" "Jackson, Mississippi." "You act mighty bright to be from there." "There are bright people in Jackson." "If there is, I got yet to see some of them. Most of them can't talk. They just stand with their heads down, with one foot on top of the other, and you have to guess at what they're trying to say." I was at ease now. I liked her. "My husband works in the bakery," she rattled on pleasantly, openly, as though she had known me for years. "We take in roomers to help out. We just simple people here. You can call this home if you got a mind to. The rent's $3. "That's a little high." "Then give me $2.50 till you get yourself a job." I accepted, and she showed me my room. I set my suitcase down. "You run off, didn't you?" she asked. I jerked in surprise. How did you know? Boy, your heart's like an open book. I know things. A lot of boys run off to Memphis from little towns. Then they think they're gonna find it easy here, but they don't. She looked at me searchingly. You drink? Oh no, man. Oh no, man. Didn't mean no harm, son. Just wanted to know. You can drink here if you like. Just don't make a fool of yourself. You can bring your girl here too. Do anything you want, but be decent. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her in amazement. It was on reputedly disreputable Bill Street in Memphis that I had met the warmest, friendliest person I had ever known. That I discovered that all human beings were not mean and driving, were not bigots like the members of my family. You can eat dinner with us when we come from church. Thank you, I'd like to. Maybe you want to come to church with us. Well, I hedged. Nah, you're tired, she said, closing the door. I lay on the bed and reveled in the delightful sensation of living out a long-sought dream. I had always flinched inwardly from the lonely terror that I had thought I would feel in a strange city. And now I had found a home with friendly people. I relaxed completely and dozed off to sleep, for I had not slept much for many nights. Later I came awake with a sudden start, remembering the fright and tension that had accompanied my foray into crime. Well, all that was gone now. I could start anew. I did not like to feel tension and fear. I wanted something else. To be human, to be caught up in something meaningful. But I must first get a job. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Moss called me for dinner and introduced me to her daughter, Bess, whom I liked at once. She was young, simple, sweet, and brown. Mrs. Moss apologized to her husband, who was still at work. Why was she treating me so kindly? It made me self-conscious. We were eating dessert when Bess spoke. Mama's done told me all about you. I'm afraid that there isn't much to tell. She said you was walking up and down the street in front of the house and didn't know whether to come in, Bess said, giggling. What kind of place do you think this was? I hung my head and smiled. Mrs. Moss went into a storm of laughter and left the room. Mama says she said to herself soon she saw you out there on that street with your suitcase. That boy's looking for a clean home to live in. Mama's good about knowing what folks feel. She seems to be, I said, helping Bess to wash the dishes. You can eat with us anytime you like. Thanks, but I couldn't do that. How come? We got a plenty. I know, but a man ought to pay his own way. Mama said you'd be like that, Bess said with satisfaction. Mrs. Moss returned to the kitchen. Bess going to be married soon. Congratulations, I said. Who's the lucky man? Oh, I ain't got nobody yet. I was puzzled. Mrs. Moss laughed and nudged me. I say gals gotta marry young. Now if Bess found a nice young man like you, Richard. Mama, Bess wailed, hiding her face in the dishcloth. I mean it, Miss Moss said. Richard's a heap better than them old ignorant nigger boys you been running after school. I gaped at one and then the other. What was happening here? They barely knew me. I had been in the house but a few hours. The minute I laid eyes on that boy in the street this morning, Miss Moss said, I said to myself, that's the kind of boy for Bess. Bess came to me and leaned her head on my shoulder. I was stunned. How on earth could she act like this? "Mama, don't," Bess pleaded teasingly. "I mean it," Miss Moss said. "Richard, I'm worried about whose hands this house is going to fall into. I ain't too long for this old world." "Bess will find a boy who'll love her," I said uneasily. "I ain't so sure," Miss Moss said, shaking her head. "I'm going up front," Bess said, giggling, burying her face in her hands and running out. Mrs. Moss came close to me and spoke confidently. "A gal's a funny thing. They has to be tamed, just like wild animals." "She's all right," I said, wiping the table, thinking furiously, not wanting to become involved too deeply with the family. "You like Bess, Richard?" Mrs. Moss asked me suddenly. I stared at her, doubting my ears. "I've been in the house only a couple of hours. She's a fine girl." "Now, I mean, do you like her? Could you love her?" she asked insistently. I stared at Mrs. Moss, wondering if something was wrong with Bess. What kind of people were these? "You people don't know me. I didn't exist for you 5 hours ago," I said seriously. Then I shot at her. "I could be a robber or a burglar for all you know." "Son, I know you." Oh, Christ, I thought. I'll have to leave this place. "You go on up front with Bess," Mrs. Moss said. "Look, Mrs. Moss, I'm just a poor nobody." "You got something in you I like. Money ain't everything. You got a good Christian heart, and everybody ain't got that." I winced and turned my head away. Her naive simplicity was overwhelming. I felt as though I had been accused of something. "I worked 20 years and bought this house myself," she went on. "I'd be happy when I died if I thought Bess had a husband like you." "Oh, Mama!" Bess shrieked with protesting laughter from the front room. I went into a warm, cozy front room and sat on the sofa. Bess was sitting on a little bench, looking out the window. How must I act toward this girl? I did not want to be drawn into something I did not want, and neither did I wish to wound anybody's feelings. "Don't you want to sit here with me?" I rose and sat with her. Neither of us spoke for a long time. "I'm the same age as you. I'm 17. "Do you go to school?" I asked to make conversation. "Yes. Want to see my books?" "I'd like to." She rose and brought her school books to me. I saw that she was in the 5th grade. "I ain't so good in school, but I don't care." "Well, school's kind of important, you know," I said cautiously. "Love is the important thing," she countered strongly. I wondered if she were demented. The behavior of the mother and the daughter ran counter to all I had ever seen or known. Mrs. Moss came into the room. "I think I'll go out and look for a job," I said, wanting to escape them. "On a Sunday?" Mrs. Moss exclaimed. "Wait till in the morning." "But I can learn the streets tonight anyway." "That's really a good thought," Mrs. Moss said after a moment's reflection. "You see, Bess, that boy thinks." I felt awkward, embarrassed, called upon to say something. "I'll be glad to help you with your lessons, Bess." "You think you can?" she asked, doubting. Well, I used to take charge of classes at school last year. Now ain't that nice? Mrs. Moss said in a honey tone. I went to my room and lay on the bed and tried to fathom out the kind of home I had come to. That they were serious, I had no doubt. Would they be angry with me when they learned that my life was a million miles from theirs? How could I avoid that? Was it wise to remain here with a 17-year-old girl eager for marriage and a mother equally anxious to have her marry me? What on earth had they seen in me to have made them act toward me as they had? My clothes were not good. True, I had manners that had been drilled into me at home, at school, manners that had been kicked into me on jobs, but anybody could have manners. I had learned to know these people better in 5 hours than I had learned to know my own family in 5 years. Later, after I had grown to understand the peasant mentality of Bess and her mother, I learned the full degree to which my life at home had cut me off. Not only from white people, but from Negroes as well. To Bess and her mother, money was important, but they did not strive for it too hard. They had no tensions, unappeasable longings, no desire to do something to redeem themselves. The main value in their lives was simple, clean, good living, and when they thought they had found those same qualities in one of their race, they instinctively embraced him, liked him, and asked no questions. But such simple, unaffected trust flabbergasted me. It was impossible. I walked down Bill Street and into the heart of Memphis. My body was thin, my overcoat shabby, and each gust of wind chilled my blood. On Main Street, I saw a sign in a cafe window. Dishwasher wanted. I went in and spoke to the manager and was hired to come to work the following night. The salary was $10 for the first week and $12 thereafter. Don't hire anyone else. I'll be here. I would get 2 meals at the cafe, but how would I eat in the daytime? I went into a store and bought a can of pork and beans and a can opener. Well, that problem was solved. I would pay $2.50 a week for my room, and I would save the balance for my trip to Chicago. All my thoughts and movements were dictated by distant hopes. Mrs. Moss was astonished when I told her that I had a job. You see, Bess? That boy's got a job his first day here. That's get up for you. He's going somewhere. He just don't sit and gab, he moves. Bess smiled at me. It seemed that every move I made captivated her. Mrs. Moss went upstairs to bed. I was uneasy. Let me rest your coat, Bess said. She took my coat and felt the can in the pocket. What you got in there? Oh, nothing. Trying to take the coat from her. She pulled out the beans in the can opener. Her eyes widened with pity. Richard, you hungry, ain't you? Nah. Then let's eat some chicken, she said. Oh, all right. Bess ran to the stairway. Mama! Don't disturb her, I said, knowing that she was going to tell Mrs. Moss about my wanting to eat out of a can and feeling my heart filled with shame, my muscles flexed to hit her. Mrs. Moss came down in her house robe. Mama, look what Richard was going to do, Bess said, showing the can. He was going to eat this in his room. Lord, boy, you don't have to do that. I'm used to it. I've got to save money. I just won't let you eat out of a can in my house. You don't have to pay me to eat. Go in the kitchen and eat, that's all. But I wouldn't dirty your room with the can. It ain't that, son, Mrs. Moore said. Why do you want to eat out of a can when you can sit at the table with us? I don't want to be a burden to anybody. Mrs. Moore stared at me, then hung her head and cried. I was stunned. It was incredible that what I did or the way I lived could evoke tears from anyone. Then my shame made me angry. You just ain't never had no home life. I'm sorry for you. I stiffened. I did not like that. She was reaching into my inner life where it was sore, and I did not want anyone there. I'm all right, I mumbled. Mrs. Moss shook her head and went upstairs. I sighed. I was afraid that the family was getting too good a hold on me. Bess and I ate chicken, but I did not have much appetite. Bess was looking at me with melting eyes. We went back to the front room. I want to get married, she whispered to me. You have a lot of time for that, I said, tense and uneasy. I want to get married now. I want to love, she said. I had never met anyone like her, so direct, so easy in the expression of her feelings. Do you know what this means? She asked me as she rose and went to a table and picked up a comb and came and stood before me. I stared at the comb, then at her. What are you talking about? She did not answer. She smiled, then came close to me and reached out with the comb and touched my head. I drew back. What are you doing? She laughed and drew the comb through my hair. I stared at her, completely baffled. But my hair doesn't need combing. I know it, she said, still combing. But why are you doing this? Because I want to. What does it mean? She laughed again. I tried to get up and she caught hold of my arm and held me in the chair. You have nice hair. It's just common nigger hair. It's nice hair. But why are you combing my hair? I asked again. You know. I don't. 'Cause I like you. Is this your way of telling me that? It's a custom. You're just fooling me. You know that. Everybody knows that. When a girl likes a man, she combs his hair. You're young. Give yourself a chance, I said. Don't you like me? She asked. I do. We're friends. But I want more than a friend, she sighed. Her simplicity frightened me. The girls I had known had been hard and calculating. Those who had worked at the hotel and those whom I had met at school. We were silent for a while. Say, what's them books in your room? She asked. Were you in my room? I asked with soft pointedness. Sure, she said without batting an eye. I looked through your suitcase. What could I do with a girl like this? Was I dumb or was she dumb? I felt that it would be easy to have sex relations with her, and I was tempted. But what would happen? Love simply did not come to me that quickly and easily. And she was talking of marriage. Could I ever talk to her about what I felt, hoped? Could she ever understand my life? What had I above sex to share with her? And what had she? But I knew that such questions did not bother her. I did not love her and did not want to marry her. The prize of the house did not tempt me. Yet I sat beside her, feeling the attraction of her body increasing and deepening for me. What if I made her pregnant? I was sure that the fear of becoming pregnant did not bother her. Perhaps she would have liked it. I had come from a home where feelings were never expressed, except in rage or religious dread, where each member of the household lived locked in his own dark world, and the light that shone out of this child's heart, for she was a child, blinded me. She leaned over and kissed me. What the hell, I thought. Have it out with her, and if anything happens, leave. I kissed and petted her. She was warm, eager, childish, pliable. She threw her arms and legs about me and hugged me fiercely. I began to wonder how old she was. What would your mother say? She's sleeping. But what if she saw us? I don't care. She was crazy. Plainly, she would have married me that instant, knowing no more about me than she did. Let's go to my room, I said. Nah, Mama wouldn't like that, she said. She would let me do anything to her in her own front room, but she did not want me to do it to her in my room. It was crazy, utterly crazy. Mama's sleeping, she observed. I began to suspect that she had every boy in the block. You love me? She asked in a whisper. I stared at her, becoming more aware each minute of the terrible simplicity of her life. That was life for her, simple, direct. She just did not attach to words the same meanings I did. She caught my hands in a vice-like grip. I looked at her and could not believe in her existence. I love you, she said. Don't say that. I said, then was sorry that I had said it. But I do love you, she said again. Her voice had come so clearly that I could no longer doubt her. For Christ's sake, I said to myself. The girl was astoundingly simple, yet vital in a way that I had never known. What kind of life had I lived that made the reality of this girl so strange? I sat thinking of Aunt Addie, her stern face, her forbidding nature, her caution, her restraint, her keen struggle to be good and holy. I'd make a good wife, she said. I disengaged my hand from hers. I looked at her and wanted either to laugh or to slap her. I was about to hurt her, and I did not want to. I rose. Oh, hell, this girl's crazy. I heard her crying, and I bent to her. Look, I whispered, you don't know me. Let's get to know each other better. Her eyes were beaten, baffled. Love was that simple to her. It could be turned on or off in a moment. You just think I'm nothing. I reached out my hand to touch her, to speak to her, to try to tell her my life, my feelings, my doubts, and she leaped to her feet. I hate you, she burst out in a passionate whisper and ran out of the room. I lit a cigarette and sat for a long time. I had never dreamed that anyone would accept me so simply, so completely without question or the least hint of personal aggrandizement. The truth was that I had, even though I had fought against it, grown to accept the value of myself that my old environment had created in me, and I had thought that no other kind of environment was possible. My life had changed too suddenly. Had I met Bess upon a Mississippi plantation, I would have expected her to act as she had. But in Memphis, on Bill Street, how could there be such hope, belief, faith in others? I wanted to go to Bess and talk to her, but I knew no words to say to her. When I awakened the next morning and recalled Bess's naive hopes, I was glad that I had the can of pork and beans. I did not want to face her across the breakfast table. I dressed to go out. Then, with my coat and hat on, I sat on the edge of the bed and propped my feet on a chair. Taking puffs from a cigarette, I scooped the beans out of the can with my fingers and ate them. I slipped out of the house and went to the water front and sat on the knoll of the earth in the cold wind and sun, looking at the boats on the Mississippi River. Tonight, I would begin my new job. I knew how to save money thanks to my long starvation in Mississippi. My heart was at peace. I was freer than I had ever been. A black boy came up to me. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said. "What you doing these days?" he asked. "Nothing, waiting for night. I got a job in a cafe." "Shucks," he said. "I'm looking for a buddy." He was trying to act tough, but I thought that he was lonely. "I want to hop a freight and go north." "Why not hop one alone?" He grinned nervously. "Did you run off from home?" "Yeah, 4 years ago," he said. "What have you been doing?" "Nothing." That should have warned me, but I was not yet wise in the ways of the world or the road. We talked a while longer, then walked down a path toward the river's edge, skirting high weeds. The boy stopped suddenly and pointed. "What's that?" "Looks like a can of some sort," I said. I saw a huge can partially screened by high weeds. We went to it and found that it was full of something heavy. I pulled out the stopper and smelt it. "The stuff is liquor." The boy smelt it and his eyes widened. "Reckon we sell it?" he asked. "But whose is it?" I asked. "Gee, I wish I could sell this stuff," he said. "Maybe somebody's watching," I suggested. We looked about, but no one was in sight. "This belongs to a bootlegger," I said. "Let's see if we can sell it," he said. "I want to take that can out of here," I said. "The cops might see us." "I need money," the boy said. "This'll help me on the road." We agreed to look for a white buyer. We went into the streets and looked over the white men who passed. Finally, we spotted one sitting alone in his car. We went up to him. "Mister," the boy said, "we found a big can of liquor over there in the weeds. You want to buy it?" The man screwed up his eyes and studied us. "Is it good liquor?" "I don't know," I said. "Go and see it." "You niggers aren't lying to me, are you?" "Come on, I'll show it to you." We led the white man to the liquor. He unstoppered it and smelled it, then tasted the wetness on the cork. "Holy cats!" He looked at us. "Did you really find this here?" "Oh, yes, sir." "If you two niggers are lying, I'll kill both of you." "We're telling the truth." The other boy stood awkwardly and looked on. I wondered why he did not say anything. Some vague thought was trying to worm its way into my dense, naive child like mind. But it did not come clear, and I brushed it away. "You boys bring this can to my car." I was afraid, but the other boy was eager and willing. With the white man encouraging us, we lugged the can to his car and put it into the back upon the floor. "Here," the white man said, extending a $5 bill to the boy. The car drove off, and I could see the white man looking about anxiously, fearing a trap, or so it seemed to me. "Gee, let's get this changed," the boy said. "All right," I said, "we'll split it." The boy pointed across the street. "There's a store over there," he said. "I'll run over and get change." "Okay," I said, angel-like. I sat on a sloping embankment and waited. He ran off in the direction of the store, but I was so confident that I did not even watch him. I felt amused. I was going to get $2.50 for finding a cachet of liquor. I was a hijacker already. Last night a girl had thrown herself at me, and all this had happened within 48 hours of my leaving home. I wanted to laugh out loud. Things could happen to one when one was not at home. I looked up, waiting for the boy to return, but I did not see him. He's sure taking his time, I thought, pushing down other ideas that were trying to bubble into my mind. I waited longer, then rose and went quickly to the store and peered through the window. The boy was not inside. I went in and asked the proprietor if a boy had came in. "Yeah, a nigger boy came in here, looked around, then went out of the back door. He went like a light. Did he have something of yours?" "Yes." "Well, you'll never see that nigger again." I walked along the streets in the winter sun, thinking, well, that's good enough for you, you fool. You had no business monkeying in that liquor business anyway. Then I stopped in my tracks. They had been together. The white man and the black boy had seen me loitering in the vicinity of their liquor and had thought I was a hijacker, and they had used me in disposing of their liquor. Last night I had found a naive girl. This morning I had been a naive boy. Chapter 12. While wandering aimlessly about the streets of Memphis, gaping at the tall buildings and the crowds, killing time, eating bags of popcorn, I was struck by an odd and sudden idea. If I had attempted to work for an optical company in Jackson and had failed, why should I not try to work for an optical company in Memphis? Memphis was not a small town like Jackson. It was urban, and I felt that no one would hold the trivial trouble I had had in Jackson against me. I looked for the address of a company in a directory and walked boldly into the building. Rode up in the elevator with a fat, round, yellow Negro of about 5 feet in height. At the 5th floor, I stepped into an office. A white man rose to meet me. "Pull off your hat." "Oh, yes, sir," I said, jerking off my hat. "What do you want?" "I was wondering if you needed a boy. I worked for an optical company for a short while in Jackson." "Why did you leave?" "I had a little trouble there," I said honestly. "Did you steal something?" "No, sir. The white boy there didn't want me to learn the optical trade and ran me off the job." "Come and sit down." I sat and recounted the story from beginning to end. "All right, Mr. Crane. But you won't get a chance to learn the optical trade here. That's not our policy." I told him that I understood and accepted his policy. I was hired at $8 per week and promised a raise of $1 a week until my wages reached 10. Though this was less than I had been offered for the cafe job, I accepted it. I liked the open, honest way in which the man talked to me, and two, the place seemed clean, brisk, businesslike. I was assigned to run errands and wash eyeglasses after they had come from the rogue smeared machines. Each evening, I had to take the sacks of packages to the post office for mailing. It was light work, and I was fast on my feet. At noon, I would forego my lunch hour and run errands for the white men who were employed in the shop. I would buy their lunches, take their suits out to have them pressed, pay their light, telephone, and gas bills, and deliver notes for them to their stenographer girlfriends in nearby office buildings. The first day I made $1.50 in tips. I deposited the money I had left from my trip and resolved to live off my tips. I was now rapidly learning to contain the tension I felt in my relations with whites, and the people in Memphis had an air of relative urbanity that took some of the sharpness off the attitude of whites toward Negroes. There were about a dozen white men in the sixth floor shop where I spent most of my time. They varied from Ku Klux Klanners to Jews, from theosophists to just plain poor whites. Although I could detect disdain and hatred in their attitudes, they never shouted at me or abused me. It was fairly easy to contemplate the race issue in the shop without reaching those heights of fear that devastated me. A measure of objectivity entered into my observations of white men and women. Either I could stand more mental strain than formerly, or I had discovered deep within me ways of handling it. When I returned to Mrs. Moss's that Monday night, she was surprised that I had changed my plans and had taken a new job. I showed her my bank book and told her my plan for saving money and bringing my mother to Memphis. As I talked to her, I tried to tell from her manner if Bess had said anything about what had happened between us, but Mrs. Moss was bland and motherly as always. Bess avoided me, refusing to speak when we were alone together, but when her mother was present, she was polite. A few days later, Mrs. Moss came to me with a baffled look in her eyes. "What's happened between you and Bess?" "Nothing," I lied, burning with shame. "She don't seem to like you no more. I wanted you all to kind of hit it off." She looked at me searchingly. "Don't you like her none?" I could not answer or look at her. I wondered if she had told Bess to give herself to me. "Well," she drawled, sighing, "I guess folks just have to love each other naturally. You can't make 'em." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Bess will find somebody." I felt sick, filled with the consciousness of the woman's helplessness, of her naive hope. Time and again she told me that Bess loved me, wanted me. She even suggested that I try Bess and see if you like her. Ain't no harm in that. And her words evoked in me a pity for her that had no name. Finally, it became unbearable. One night I returned home from work and found Mrs. Moss sitting by the stove in the hall. Nodding, she blinked her eyes and smiled. "How are you, son?" "Pretty good." "Ain't you and Bess got to be friends or something yet?" "No, ma'am," I said softly. "How come you don't like Bess?" she demanded. "Oh, I don't know." I was becoming angry. "It's 'cause she ain't so bright." "No, man, Bess bright," I lied. "Then how come?" I still could not tell her. "You and Bess could have this house for your home," she went on. "You all could bring up your children here." "But people have to find their own way to each other," I said. "Young folks ain't got no sense these days," she said at last. "If somebody had fixed things for me when I was a gal, I sure would have taken it. Miss Morris, I think I better move. Move then, she exploded. You ain't got no sense. I went to my room and began to pack. A knock came at the door. I opened it. Mrs. Morris stood in the doorway weeping. Son, forgive me. I didn't mean it. I wouldn't hurt you for nothing. You just like a son of me. That's all right, but I better move. No, then you ain't forgive me. When anybody asks forgiveness, they means it. I stared. Bess appeared in the doorway. Don't leave, Richard. We won't bother you no more, Miss Morris said. I wilted, baffled, sorry, ashamed. Mrs. Morris took Bess's hand and led her away. I centered my attention now upon making enough money to send for my mother and brother. I saved each penny I came by, stinting myself on food, walking to work, eating out of paper bags, living on a pint of milk and 2 sweet rolls for breakfast, a hamburger and peanuts for lunch, and a can of beans, which I would eat at night in my room. I was used to hunger, and I did not need much food to keep me alive. I now had more money than I had ever had before, and I began patronizing second-hand bookstores, buying magazines and books. In this way I became acquainted with periodicals like Harper's Magazine, the Atlantic Monthly, and the American Mercury. I would buy them for a few cents, read them, then resell them to the book dealer. Once Mrs. Morris questioned me about my reading. What you reading all them books for, boy? I just like to. You studying for law? No, ma'am. Well, I reckon you know what you're doing. Though I did not have to report for work until 9 o'clock each morning, I would arrive at 8 and go into the lobby of the downstairs bank where I knew the Negro porter and read the early edition of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, thereby saving myself 5 cents each day, which I spent for lunch. After reading, I would watch the black porter perform his morning ritual. He would get a mop, bucket, soap flakes, water, then would pause dramatically, roll his eyes to the ceiling, and sing out, Lord, today I'm still working for the white folks. And he would mop until he sweated. He hated his job and talked incessantly of leaving to work in the post office. The most colorful of the Negro boys on the job was Shorty, the round, yellow, fat elevator operator. He had tiny, beady eyes that looked out between rolls of flesh with a hard but humorous stare. He had the complexion of a Chinese, a short forehead and 3 chins. Psychologically, he was the most amazing specimen of the Southern Negro I had ever met. Hard-headed, sensible, a reader of magazines and books, he was proud of his race and indignant about its wrongs. But in the presence of whites, he would play the role of a clown, of the most debased and degraded type. One day he needed 25 cents to buy his lunch. Just watch me get a quarter from the first white man I see, he told me as I stood in the elevator that morning. A white man who worked in the building stepped into the elevator and waited to be lifted to his floor. Shorty sang in a low mumble, smiling, rolling his eyes, looking at the white man roguishly. I'm hungry, Mr. White Man. I need a quarter for lunch. The white man ignored him. Shorty, his hands on the controls of the elevator, sang again. I ain't gonna move this damned old elevator till I get a quarter, Mr. White Man. The hell with you, Shorty, the white man said, ignoring him and chewing on his black cigar. I'm hungry, Mr. White Man. I'm dying for a quarter. Shorty sang, drooling, drawling, humming his words. If you don't take me to my floor, you will die, the white man said, smiling a little for the first time. But this black son of a bitch sure needs a quarter, Shorty sang, grimacing, clowning, ignoring the white man's threat. Come on, you black bastard, I gotta go to work, the white man said, intrigued by the element of sadism involved, enjoying it. It'll cost you 25 cents, Mr. White Man. Just a quarter, just 2 bits, Shorty moaned. There was silence. Shorty threw the lever, and the elevator went up and stopped about 5 feet shy of the floor upon which the white man worked. Can't go no more, Mr. White Man, unless I get my quarter, he said in a tone that sounded like crying. What will you do for a quarter? The white man asked, still gazing off. I'll do anything for a quarter, Shorty sang. What, for example? Shorty giggled, swung around, bent over, and poked out his broad, fleshy ass. You can kick me for a quarter, he sang, looking impishly at the white man out of the corners of his eyes. The white man laughed softly, jingled some coins in his pocket, took out one and thumped it to the floor. Shorty stooped to pick it up, and the white man bared his teeth and swung his foot into Shorty's rump with all the strength of his body. Shorty let out a howling laugh that echoed up and down the elevator shaft. Now open this door, you goddamn black son of a bitch, the white man said, smiling with tight lips. Yes, sir, Shorty sang, but first he picked up the quarter and put it into his mouth. This monkey's got the peanuts, he chortled. He opened the door, and the white man stepped out and looked back at Shorty as he went toward his office. You're all right, Shorty, you son of a bitch. I know it, Shorty screamed, then let his voice trail off in a gale of wild laughter. I witnessed this scene or its variant at least a score of times, and I felt no anger or hatred, only disgust and loathing. Once I asked him, how in God's name can you do that? I needed a quarter, and I got it, he said soberly, proudly. But a quarter can't pay you for what he did to you. Listen, nigga. My ass is tough and quarters is scarce. I never discussed the subject with him after that. Other Negroes worked in the building. An old man whom we called Edison, his son John, and a night janitor who answered to the name of Dave. At noon, when I was not running errands, I would join the rest of the Negroes in a little room at the front of the building overlooking the street. Here, in this underworld pocket of the building, we munched our lunches and discussed the ways of white folks toward Negroes. When 2 or more of us were talking, it was impossible for this subject not to come up. Each of us hated and feared the whites. Yet, had a white man put in a sudden appearance, we would have assumed silent, obedient smiles. To our minds, the white folks formed a kind of superworld. What was said by them during working hours was rehashed and weighed here. How they looked, what they wore, what moods they were in, who had outdistanced whom in business, who was replacing whom on the job, who was getting fired and who was getting hired. But never once did we openly say that we occupied none but subordinate positions in the building. Our talk was restricted to the petty relations which formed the core of life for us. But under all our talk floated a latent sense of violence. The whites had drawn a line over which we dared not step, and we accepted that line because our bread was at stake. But within our boundaries, we too drew a line that included our right to bread regardless of the indignities or degradations involved in getting it. If a white man had sought to keep us from obtaining a job or enjoying the rights of citizenship, we would have bowed silently to his power. But if he had sought to deprive us of a dime, blood might have been spilt. Hence, our daily lives were so bound up with trivial objectives that to capitulate when challenged was tantamount to surrendering the right to life itself. Our anger was like the anger of children, passing quickly from one petty grievance to another, from the memory of one slight wrong to another. "You know what that bastard Olin said to me this morning?" John would ask, biting into a juicy hamburger. "What?" Shorty would ask. "Well, I brought him his change from paying his gas bill, and he said, 'Put it here in my pocket. My hands are dirty.'" John said, "Huh?" "I just laid the money on the bench beside him. I ain't no personal slave to him, and I'd be damned if I put his own money in his own pocket." "Hell, you're right," Shorty would say. "White folks just don't think," Old Man Edison would say. "You sure got to watch 'em," Dave the janitor would say. He would have slept in the room on a cot after his night's cleaning. He would be ready now to keep a date with some girlfriend. "Falk sent me to have his suit pressed. He didn't give me a penny. Told me he would remember it on payday." "Ain't that some nerve?" John would say. "You can't eat his memories," Shorty would say. "But you got to keep on doing them favors," Old Man Edison would say. "If you don't, they won't like you." "I'm going north one of these days," Shorty would say. We would all laugh, knowing that Shorty would never leave, that he depended too much upon the whites for the food he ate. "What will you do up north?" I would ask Shorty. "I pass for Chinese," Shorty would say. And we would laugh again. The lunch hour would pass and we would go back to work, but there would be in our faces not one whit of the sentiment we had felt during the hour of discussion. One day I went to the optical counter of a department store to deliver a pair of eyeglasses. The counter was empty of customers, and a tall, florid, white-faced man looked at me curiously. He was unmistakably a Yankee, for his physical build differed sharply from that of the lanky Southerner. "Will you please sign for this, sir?" I asked, presenting the account book and the eyeglasses. He picked up the book and the glasses, but his eyes were still upon me. "Say, boy, I'm from the north," he said quietly. I held very still. Was this a trap? He had mentioned a tabooed subject, and I wanted to wait until I knew what he meant. Among the topics that Southern white men did not like to discuss with Negroes were the following: American white women, the Ku Klux Klan, France, and how Negro soldiers fared there, French women, Jack Johnson, the entire northern part of the United States, the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, U.S. Grant, General Sherman, Catholics, the Pope, Jews, the Republican Party, slavery, social equality, communism, socialism, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, or any topic calling for positive knowledge or manly self-assertion on the part of the Negro. The most accepted topics were sex and religion. I did not look at the man or answer. With one sentence, He had lifted out of the silent dark the race question, and I stood on the edge of a precipice. "Don't be afraid of me," he went on. "I just want to ask you one question." "Yes, sir," I said in a waiting, neutral tone. "Tell me, boy, are you hungry?" He asked seriously. I stared at him. He had spoken one word that touched the very soul of me, but I could not talk to him, could not let him know that I was starving myself to save money to go north. I did not trust him, but my face did not change its expression. "Oh, no, sir," I said, managing a smile. I was hungry and he knew it. But he was a white man, and I felt that if I told him I was hungry, I would have been revealing something shameful. "Boy, I can see hunger in your face and eyes." "I get enough to eat," I lied. "Then why do you keep so thin?" he asked me. "Well, I suppose I'm just that way naturally." I lied. "You're just scared, boy." "Oh, no, sir." I lied again. I could not look at him. I wanted to leave the counter, yet he was a white man, and I learned not to walk abruptly away from a white man when he was talking to me. I stood, my eyes looking away. He ran his hand into his pocket and pulled out a dollar bill. "Here, take this dollar and buy yourself some food." "No, sir," I said. "Don't be a fool. You're ashamed to take it. God, boy, don't let a thing like that stop you from taking a dollar and eating." The more he talked, the more it became impossible for me to take the dollar. I wanted it, but I could not look at it. I wanted to speak, but I could not move my tongue. I wanted him to leave me alone. He frightened me. "Say something," he said. All about us in the store were piles of goods. White men and women went from counter to counter. It was summer, and from a high ceiling was suspended a huge electric fan that whirled. I stood waiting for the white man to give me the signal that would let me go. "I don't understand it," he said through his teeth. "How far did you go in school?" "Through the 9th grade, but it was really the 8th, I told him. You see, our studies in the 9th grade were more or less a review of what we had in the 8th grade. Silence. He had not asked me for this long explanation, but I had spoken at length to fill up the yawning, shameful gap that loomed between us. I had spoken to try to drag the unreal nature of the conversation back to safe and sound southern ground. Of course, the conversation was real. It dealt with my welfare, but it had been brought to the surface of day all the dark fears I had known all my life. The Yankee white man did not know how dangerous his words were. There are some elusive, profound, recondite things that men find hard to say to other men, but with the Negro, it is the little things of life that become hard to say, for these tiny items shape his destiny. A man will seek to express his relation to the stars, but when a man's consciousness has been riveted upon obtaining a loaf of bread, that loaf of bread is as important as the stars. Another white man walked up to the counter, and I sighed with relief. "Do you want the dollar?" the man asked. "No, sir," I whispered. "All right, just forget it." He signed the account book and took the eyeglasses. I stuffed the book into my bag and turned from the counter and walked down the aisle, feeling a physical tingling along my spine. Knowing that the white man knew I was really hungry, I avoided him after that. Whenever I saw him, I felt in a queer way that he was my enemy. But he knew how I felt, and the safety of my life in the South depended upon how well I concealed from all whites what I felt. One summer morning, I stood at a sink in the rear of the factory, washing a pair of eyeglasses that had just come from the polishing machines. whose throbbing shook the floor upon which I stood. At each machine, a white man was bent forward, working intently. To my left, sunshine poured through a window, lighting up the rogue smears and making the factory look garish, violent, dangerous. It was nearing noon, and my mind was drifting toward my daily lunch of a hamburger and a bag of peanuts. It had been a routine day, a day more or less like the other days I had spent on the job as an errand boy and washer of glasses. I was at peace with the world. That is, at peace in the only way in which a black boy in the South can be at peace with a world of white men. Perhaps it was the mere sameness of the day that soon made it different from the other days. Maybe the white men who operated the machines felt bored with their dull, automatic task and hankered for some kind of excitement. Anyway, I presently heard footsteps behind me and turned my head. At my elbow stood a young white man, Mr. Olin, the immediate foreman under whom I worked. He was smiling and observing me, and as I cleaned emery dust from the eyeglasses. "Boy, how's it going?" "Oh, fine, sir," I answered with false heartiness, falling quickly into that nigger being a good-natured boy in the presence of a white man pattern, a pattern into which I could now slide easily, although I was wondering if he had any criticism to make of my work. He continued to hover wordlessly at my side. What did he want? It was unusual for him to stand there and watch me. I wanted to look at him, but was afraid to. "Say, Richard, do you believe that I'm your friend?" The question was so loaded with danger that I could not reply at once. I scarcely knew Mr. Olin. My relation to him had been the typical relationship of Negroes to Southern whites. He gave me orders, and I said, "Yes, sir," and obeyed them. Now, without warning, he was asking me if I thought that he was my friend, and I knew that all Southern white men fancied themselves as friends of niggers. While fishing for an answer that would say nothing, I smiled. "I mean," he persisted, "do you think I'm your friend?" "Well," I answered, skirting the vast racial chasm between us, "I hope you are." "I am," he answered emphatically. I continued to work, wondering what motives were prompting him. Already apprehension was rising in me. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Yes, sir." "We don't want you to get hurt," he explained. "We like you round here. You act like a good boy." "Yes, sir," I said. "What's wrong?" "You don't deserve to get into trouble," he went on. "Have I done something that somebody doesn't like?" I asked, my mind frantically sweeping over all my past actions, weighing them in the light of the way Southern white men thought Negroes should act. "Well, I don't know," he said, and paused, letting his words sink meaningfully into my mind. He lit a cigarette. "Do you know Harrison?" He was referring to a Negro boy of about my own age who worked across the street for a rival optical house. Harrison and I knew each other casually, but there had never been the slightest trouble between us. "Yes, sir, I know him." "Well, be careful," Mr. Olin said. "He's after you." "After me? For what?" "He's got a terrific grudge against you," the white man explained. "What have you done to him?" The eyeglasses I was washing were forgotten. My eyes were upon Mr. Olin's face, trying to make out what he meant. Was this something serious? I did not trust the white man, and neither did I trust Harrison. Negroes who worked on jobs in the South were usually loyal to their white bosses. They felt that that was the best way to ensure their jobs. Had Harrison felt that I had in some way jeopardized his job? Who was my friend? The white man or the black boy? I haven't done anything to Harrison. Well, you better watch that nigger Harrison, Mr. Olin said in a low, confidential tone. A little while ago I went down to get a Coca-Cola and Harrison was waiting for you at the door of the building with a knife. He asked me when you were coming down. Said he was going to get you. Said you called him a dirty name. Now we don't want any fighting or bloodshed on the job. I still doubted the white man, yet thought that perhaps Harrison had really interpreted something I had said as an insult. I got to see that boy and talk to him, I said, thinking out loud. No, you better not, Mr. Olin said. You better let some of us white boys talk to him. But how did this start? I asked, still doubting but half believing. He just told me that he was going to get even with you, going to cut you and teach you a lesson. But don't you worry, let me handle this. He patted my shoulder and went back to his machine. He was an important man in the factory and I had always respected his word. He had the authority to order me to do this or that. Now, why would he joke with me? White men did not often joke with Negroes. Therefore, what he had said was serious. I was upset. We black boys worked long, hard hours for what few pennies we earned, and we were edgy and tense. Perhaps that crazy Harrison was really after me. My appetite was gone. I had to settle this thing. A white man had walked into my delicately balanced world and had tipped it, and I had to right it before I could feel safe. Yes, I would go directly to Harrison and ask what was the matter. What I had said that he resented. Harrison was black and so was I. I would ignore the warning of the white man and talk face to face with a boy of my own color. At noon, I went across the street and found Harrison sitting on a box in the basement. He was eating lunch and reading a pulp magazine. As I approached him, he ran his hand into his pocket and looked at me with cold, watchful eyes. Say, Harrison, what's all this about? I asked, standing cautiously 4 feet from him. He looked at me for a long time and did not answer. I haven't done anything to you. And I ain't got nothing against you, he mumbled, still watchful. I don't bother nobody. But Mr. Olin said that you came over to the factory this morning looking for me with a knife. Oh, no, he said more at ease now. I ain't been in your factory all day. He had not looked at me as he spoke. And what did Mr. Olin mean, I asked. I'm not angry with you. Shucks, I thought you was looking for me to cut me, Harrison explained. Mr. Olin, he came over here this morning and said you was going to kill me with the knife the moment you saw me. He said you was mad at me because I had insulted you. But I ain't said nothing about you. He still had not looked at me. He rose. And I haven't said anything about you. Finally, he looked at me and I felt better. We two black boys, each working for $10 a week, stood staring at each other, thinking, comparing the motives of the absent white man, each asking himself if he could believe the other. But why would Mr. Olin tell me things like that? I asked. Harrison dropped his head. He laid his sandwich aside. He stammered and pulled from his pocket a long gleaming knife. It was already open. I was just waiting to see what you was gonna do to me. I leaned weakly against the wall, feeling sick, my eyes upon the sharp steel blade of the knife. You were going to cut me? If you had cut me, I was going to cut you first. I ain't taking no chances. Are you angry with me about something? I asked. Man, I ain't mad at nobody, Harrison said uneasily. I felt how close I had come to being slashed. Had I come suddenly upon Harrison, he would have thought I was trying to kill him, and he would have stabbed me, perhaps killed me. And what did it matter if one nigga killed another? Look here, I said, don't believe what Mr. Olin says. I see now, Harrison said, he's playing a dirty trick on us. He's trying to make us kill each other for nothing. How come he want to do that? Harrison asked. I shook my head. Harrison sat, but still played with the open knife. I began to doubt. Was he really angry with me? Was he waiting until I turned my back to stab me? I was in torture. I suppose it's fun for white men to see niggas fight, I said, forcing a laugh. But you might have killed me, Harrison said. To white men, we're like dogs or cocks, I said. I don't want to cut you, Harrison said, and I don't want to cut you. Standing well out of each other's reach, we discussed the problem and decided that we would keep silent about our conference. We would not let Mr. Olin know that we knew that he was egging us to fight. We agreed to ignore any further provocations. At 1 o'clock, I went back to the factory. Mr. Olin was waiting for me, his manner grave, his face serious. Did you see that Harrison nigger? No, sir, I lied. Well, he still has that knife for you. Hate tightened in me, but I kept a dead face. Did you buy a knife yet? No, sir. Do you want to use mine? You got to protect yourself, you know. No, sir, I'm not afraid. Nigga, you're a fool. I thought you had some sense. Are you going to just let that nigga cut your heart out? His boss gave him a knife to use against you. Take this knife, nigga, and stop acting crazy. I was afraid to look at him. If I had looked at him, I would have had to tell him to leave me alone, that I knew he was lying, that I knew he was no friend of mine, that I knew if anyone had thrust a knife through my heart, he would simply have laughed. But I had said nothing. He was the boss, and he could fire me if he did not like me. He laid an open knife on the edge of his workbench, about a foot from my hand. I had a fleeting urge to pick it up and give it to him, point first into his chest, but I did nothing of the kind. I picked up the knife and put it into my pocket. Now you're acting like a nigger with some sense. As I worked, Mr. Olin watched me from his machine. Later, when I passed him, he called me. Now look here, boy. We told that Harrison nigger to stay out of this building and leave you alone, see? But I can't protect you when you go home. If that nigger starts at you when you are on your way home, you stab him before he gets a chance to stab you, see? I avoided looking at him and remained silent. Suit yourself, nigger, Mr. Olin said, but don't say I didn't warn you. I had to make my round of errands to deliver eyeglasses, and I stole a few minutes to run across the street to talk to Harrison. Harrison was sullen and bashful, wanting to trust me but afraid. He told me that Mr. Olin had telephoned his boss, and had told him to tell Harrison that I planned to wait for him at the back entrance of the building at 6 o'clock and stab him. Harrison and I found it difficult to look at each other. We were upset and distrustful. We were not really angry at each other. We knew that the idea of murder had been planted in each of us by the white man who employed us. We told ourselves again and again that we did not agree with the white men. We urged ourselves to keep faith in each other. Yet there lingered deep down in each of us a suspicion that maybe one of us was trying to kill the other. I'm not angry with you, Harrison. I don't want to fight nobody, Harrison said bashfully, but he kept his hand in his pocket on his knife. Each of us felt the shame, felt how foolish and weak we were in the face of the domination of the whites. I wish they'd leave us alone, I said. Me too. There are a million black boys like us to run errands, I said. They wouldn't care if we killed each other. I know it, Harrison said. Was he acting? I could not believe him. We were toying with the idea of death for no reason that stemmed from our own lives, but because the men who ruled us had thrust the idea into our minds. Each of us depended upon the whites for the bread we ate, and we actually trusted the whites more than we did each other. Yet there existed in us a longing to trust men of our own color. Again, Harrison and I parted, vowing not to be influenced by what our white bossmen said to us. The game of egging Harrison and me to fight, to cut each other, kept up for a week. We were afraid to tell the white men that we did not believe them, for that would have been tantamount to calling them liars or risking an argument that might have ended in violence being directed against us. One morning, a few days later, Mr. Olin and a group of white men came to me and asked me if I was willing to settle my grudge with Harrison with gloves, according to boxing rules. I told them that, though I was not afraid of Harrison, I did not want to fight him, and that I did not know how to box. I could feel now that they knew I no longer believed them. When I left the factory that evening, Harrison yelled at me from down the block. I waited and he ran toward me. Did he want to cut me? I backed away as he approached. We smiled uneasily and sheepishly at each other. We spoke haltingly, weighing our words. Did they ask you to fight me with gloves? Harrison asked. Yes, but I didn't agree. Harrison's face became eager. They want us to fight 4 rounds for $5 apiece. Man, if I had $5, I could pay down on the suit. $5 is almost half a week's wages for me. I don't want to. We won't hurt each other, he said. But why do a thing like that for white men? To get that $5? I don't need $5 that much. Ah, you're a fool, he said. Then he smiled quickly. Now look here, I said, maybe you are angry with me. No, I'm not, he shook his head vigorously. I don't want to fight for white men. I'm no dog or rooster. I was watching Harrison closely, and he was watching me closely. Did he really want to fight me for some reason of his own? Or was it the money? Harrison stared at me with puzzled eyes. He stepped toward me, and I stepped away. He smiled nervously. I need that money, he said. Nothing doing, I said. He walked off wordlessly, with an air of anger. Maybe he will stab me now, I thought. I got to watch that fool. For another week, the white men of both factories begged us to fight. They made up stories about what Harrison had said about me, and when they saw Harrison, they lied to him in the same way. Harrison and I were wary of each other whenever we met. We smiled and kept out of arm's reach, ashamed of ourselves and each other. Again, Harrison called to me one evening as I was on my way home. Come on and fight, he begged. I don't want to, and quit asking me, I said in a voice louder and harder than I had intended. Harrison looked at me and I watched him. Both of us still carried the knives that the white men had given us. I want to make a payment on a suit of clothes with that $5, Harrison said. But those white men will be looking at us, laughing at us, I said. What the hell, Harrison said. They look at you and laugh at you every day, nigger. It was true, but I hated him for saying it. I ached to hit him in his mouth to hurt him. "What have we got to lose?" Harrison asked. "I don't suppose we have anything to lose," I said. "Sure," he said. "Let's get the money. We don't care." And now they know that we know what they tried to do to us. I said, hating myself for it, and they hate us for it. "Sure," Harrison said. "So let's get the money. You can use $5, can't you?" "Yes." "Then let's fight for him." "I'd feel like a dog." To them, both of us are dogs. Yes, I admit it, but again, I wanted to hit him. "Look, let's fool them white men," Harrison said. "We won't hurt each other. We'll just pretend, see? We'll show them we ain't dumb as they think, see?" "I don't know." "It's just exercise. 4 rounds for $5. You scared?" "No." "Then come on and fight." "All right," I said. "It's just exercise. I'll fight." Harrison was happy. I felt that it was all very foolish, but what the hell, I would go through with it, and that would be the end of it. But I still felt a vague anger that would not leave. When the white men in the factory heard that we had agreed to fight, their excitement knew no bounds. They offered to teach me new punches. Each morning they would tell me in whispers that Harrison was eating raw onions for strength. And from Harrison I heard that they told him I was eating raw meat for strength. They offered to buy me my meals each day, but I refused. I grew ashamed of what I had agreed to do and wanted to back out of the fight, but I was afraid that they would be angry if I tried to. I felt that if white men tried to persuade 2 black boys to stab each other for no reason save their own pleasure, then it would not be difficult for them to aim a wonton blow at a black boy in a fit of anger and a passing mood of frustration. The fight took place one Saturday afternoon in the basement of a Main Street building. Each white man who attended the fight dropped his share of the pot into a hat that sat on the concrete floor. Only white men were allowed in the basement. No women or Negroes were admitted. Harrison and I were stripped to the waists. A bright electric bulb glowed above our heads. As the gloves were tied on my hands, I looked at Harrison and saw his eyes watching me. Would he keep his promise? Doubt made me nervous. We squared off, and at once I knew that I had not thought sufficiently about what I had bargained for. I could not pretend to fight. Neither Harrison nor I knew enough about boxing to deceive even a child for a moment. Now shame filled me. The white men were smoking and yelling obscenities at us. "Crush that nigger's nuts, nigger! Hit that nigger! I'll fight you goddamn niggers! Sock him in his fucking piece! Make him bleed!" I lashed out with a timid left. Harrison landed high on my head, and before I knew it, I had landed a hard right on Harrison's mouth and blood came. Harrison shot a blow to my nose. The fight was on. Was on against our will. I felt trapped and ashamed. I lashed out even harder, and the harder I fought, the harder Harrison fought. Our plans and promises now meant nothing. We fought 4 hard rounds, stabbing, slugging, grunting, spitting, cursing, crying, bleeding. The shame and anger we felt for having allowed ourselves to be duped crept into our blows, and blood ran into our eyes, half blinding us. The hate we felt for the men whom we had tried to cheat went into the blows we threw at each other. The white men made the rounds last as long as 5 minutes, and each of us was afraid to stop and ask for time for fear of receiving a blow that would knock us out. When we were on the point of collapsing from exhaustion, they pulled us apart. I could not look at Harrison. I hated him, and I hated myself. I clutched my $5 in my fist and walked home. Harrison and I avoided each other after that, and we rarely spoke. The white men attempted to arrange other fights for us, but we had sense enough to refuse. I heard of other fights being staged between other black boys, and each time I heard those plans falling from the lips of the white men in the factory. I eased out of earshot. I felt that I had done something unclean, something for which I could never properly atone. Chapter 13. One morning I arrived early at work and went into the bank lobby where the Negro porter was mopping. I stood at a counter and picked up the Memphis Commercial Appeal and began my free reading of the press. I came finally to the editorial page and saw an article dealing with one H.L. Mencken. I knew by hearing that he was the editor of the American Mercury. But aside from that, I knew nothing about him. The article was a furious denunciation of Mencken, concluding with one hot, short sentence: Mencken is a fool. I wondered what on earth this Mencken had done to call down upon him the scorn of the South. The only people I had ever heard denounced in the South were Negroes, and this man was not a Negro. Then what ideas did Mencken hold that made a newspaper like the Commercial Appeal castigate him publicly? Undoubtedly, he must be advocating ideas that the South did not like. Were there, then, people other than Negroes who criticized the South? I knew that during the Civil War the South had hated Northern whites, but I had not encountered such hate during my life. Knowing no more of Mencken than I did at that moment, I felt a vague sympathy for him. Had not the South, which had assigned me the role of a non-man, cast at him its hardest words? Now, how could I find out about this Mencken? There was a huge library near the riverfront, but I knew that Negroes were not allowed to patronize its shelves any more than they were the parks and playgrounds of the city. I had gone into the library several times to get books for the white men on the job. Which of them would now help me to get books? And how could I read them without causing concern to the white men with whom I worked? I had so far been successful in hiding my thoughts and feelings from them, but I knew that I would create hostility if I went about this business of reading in a clumsy way. I weighed the personalities of the men on the job. There was Don, a Jew, but I distrusted him. His position was not much better than mine, and I knew that he was uneasy and insecure. He had always treated me in an offhand, bantering way that barely concealed his contempt. I was afraid to ask him to help me to get books. His frantic desire to demonstrate a racial solidarity with the whites against Negroes might make him betray me. Then how about the boss? No, he was a Baptist, and I had the suspicion that he would not be quite able to comprehend why a black boy would want to read Mencken. There were other white men on the job whose attitudes showed clearly that they were Kluxers or sympathizers, and they were out of the question. There remained only one man whose attitude did not fit into an anti-Negro category, for I had heard the white men refer to him as a Pope lover. He was an Irish Catholic and was hated by the white Southerners. I knew that he read books because I had got him volumes from the library several times. Since he, too, was an object of hatred, I felt that he might refuse me, but would hardly betray me. I hesitated, weighing and balancing the imponderable realities. One morning, I paused before the Catholic fellow's desk. "I want to ask you a favor." What is it? I want to read. I can't get books from the library. I wonder if you let me use your card. He looked at me suspiciously. My card is full most of the time. I see, I said and waited, posing my question silently. You're not trying to get me into trouble, are you, boy? He asked, staring at me. Oh, no, sir. What book do you want? A book by H.L. Mencken. Which one? I don't know. Has he written more than one? He has written several. I didn't know that. What makes you want to read Mencken? Oh, I just saw his name in the newspaper. It's good of you to want to read, but you ought to read the right things. I said nothing. Would he want to supervise my reading? Let me think, he said. I'll figure out something. I turned from him and he called me back. He stared at me quizzically. Richard, don't mention this to the other white men. I understand. I won't say a word. A few days later he called me to him. I've got a card in my wife's name. Here's mine. Thank you, sir. Do you think you can manage it? I'll manage fine. If they suspect you, you'll get in trouble. I'll write the same kind of notes to the library that you wrote when you sent me for books. I told him. I'll sign your name. He laughed. Go ahead, let me see what you get. That afternoon I addressed myself to forging a note. Now, what were the names of books written by H.L. Mencken? I did not know any of them. I finally wrote what I thought would be a foolproof note. Dear Madam, will you please let this nigger boy, I used the word nigger to make the librarian feel that I could not possibly be the author of the note, have some books by H.L. Mencken. I forged the white man's name. I entered the library as I had always done when on errands for whites, but I felt that I would somehow slip up and betray myself. I doffed my hat, stood a respectful distance from the desk, looked as unbookish as possible, and waited for the white patrons to be taken care of. When the desk was clear of people, I still waited. The white librarian looked at me. What do you want, boy? As though I did not possess the power of speech, I stepped forward and simply handed her the forged note, not parting my lips. What books by Mencken does he want? She asked. I don't know, ma'am, I said, avoiding her eyes. Who gave you this card? Mr. Falk. Where is he? He's at work. At the optical company. I've been in here for him before. I remember, the woman said, but he never wrote notes like this. Oh God, she's suspicious. Perhaps she would not let me have the books. If she had turned her back at that moment, I would have ducked out the door and never gone back. Then I thought of a bold idea. You can call him up, ma'am, I said, my heart pounding. You're not using these books, are you? She asked pointedly. Oh, no, ma'am, I can't read. I don't know what he wants by Mencken, she said under her breath. I knew now that I had won. She was thinking of other things, and the race question had gone out of her mind. She went to the shelves. Once or twice she looked over her shoulder at me, as though she was still doubtful. Finally, she came forward with 2 books in her hand. I'm sending him 2 books, she said, but tell Mr. Falk to come in next time or send me the names of the books he wants. I don't know what he wants to read." I said nothing. She stamped the card and handed me the books. Not daring to glance at them, I went out of the library, fearing that the woman would call me back for further questioning. A block away from the library, I opened one of the books and read a title: A Book of Prefaces. I was nearing my 19th birthday, and I did not know how to pronounce the word preface. I thumbed the pages and saw strange words and strange names. I shook my head, disappointed. I looked at the other book. It was called Prejudices. I knew what that word meant. I had heard it all my life, and right off I was on guard against Mencken's books. Why would a man want to call a book Prejudices? The word was so stained with all my memories of racial hate that I could not conceive of anybody using it for a title. Perhaps I had made a mistake about Mencken. A man who had prejudices must be wrong. When I showed the book to Mr. Falk, he looked at me and frowned. "That librarian might telephone you," I warned him. "That's all right. But when you're through reading those books, I want you to tell me what you get out of them." That night in my rented room, while letting the hot water run over my can of pork and beans in the sink, I opened a book of prefaces and began to read. I was jarred and shocked by the style, the clear, clean, sweeping sentences. Why did he write like that? And how did one write like that? I pictured the man as a raging demon, slashing with his pen, consumed with hate, denouncing everything American, extolling everything European or German, laughing at the weaknesses of people, mocking God, authority. What was this? I stood up trying to realize what reality lay behind the meaning of the words. Yes, this man was fighting with his words. He was using words as a weapon, using them as one would use a club. Could words be weapons? Well, yes, for here they were. Then, maybe, perhaps, I could use them as a weapon. No, it frightened me. I read on, and what amazed me was not what he said, but how on earth anybody had the courage to say it. Occasionally, I glanced up to reassure myself that I was alone in the room. Who were these men about whom Mencken was talking so passionately? Who was Anatole France, Joseph Conrad, Sinclair Lewis, Sherwood Anderson, Dostoevsky, George Moore, Gustave Flaubert, Maupassant, Tolstoy, Frank Harris, Mark Twain, Thomas Hardy, Arnold Bennett, Stephen Crane, Zola, Norris, Gorky, Bergson, Ibsen, Balzac, Bernard Shaw, Dumas, Poe, Thomas Mann, O. Henry, Dreiser, H.G. Wells, Gogol, T.S. Eliot, Guide, Baudelaire, Edgar Lee Masters, Stendhal, Turgenev, Honecker, Nietzsche, and scores of others. Were these men real? Did they exist, or had they existed? And how did one pronounce their names? I ran across many words whose meanings I did not know, and I either looked them up in a dictionary or, before I had a chance to do that, encountered the word in a context that made its meaning clear. But what strange world was this? I concluded the book with the conviction that I had somehow overlooked something terribly important in life. I had once tried to write, had once reveled in feeling, had let my crude imagination roam, but the impulse to dream had been slowly beaten out of me by experience. Now it surged up again, and I hungered for books, new ways of looking and seeing. It was not a matter of believing or disbelieving what I read, but of feeling something new, of being affected by something that made the look of the world different. As dawn broke, I ate my pork and beans, feeling dopey, sleepy. I went to work, but the mood of the book would not die. It lingered, colored everything I saw, heard, did, and now felt that I knew what the white men were feeling, merely because I had read a book that had spoken of how they lived and thought. I identified myself with that book. I felt vaguely guilty. Would I, filled with bookish notions, act in a manner that would make the whites dislike me? I forged more notes, and my trips to the library became frequent. Reading grew into a passion. My first serious novel was Sinclair Lewis's Main Street. It made me see my boss, Mr. Gerald, and identify him as an American type. I would smile when I saw him lugging his golf bags into the office. I had always felt a vast distance separating me from the boss, and now I felt closer to him, though still distant. I felt now that I knew him, that I could feel the very limits of his narrow life. And this had happened because I had read a novel about a mythical man named George F. Babbitt. The plots and stories in the novels did not interest me so much as the point of view revealed. I gave myself over to each novel without reserve, without trying to criticize it. It was enough for me to see and feel something different, and for me everything was something different. Reading was like a drug, a dope. The novels created moods in which I lived for days, but I could not conquer my sense of guilt, my feeling that the white men around me knew that I was changing, that I had begun to regard them differently. Whenever I brought a book to the job, I wrapped it in newspaper, a habit that was to persist for years in other cities and under other circumstances. But some of the white men pried into my packages when I was absent, and they questioned me. "Boy, what are you reading those books for?" "Oh, I don't know, sir." "That's deep stuff you're reading, boy." "I'm just killing time, sir." "You'll addle your brains if you don't watch out." I read Dreiser's Jenny Gerhardt and Sister Carrie, and they revived in me a vivid sense of my mother's suffering. I was overwhelmed. I grew silent, wondering about the life around me. It would have been impossible for me to have told anyone what I derived from these novels, for it was nothing less than a sense of life itself. All my life had shaped me for the realism, the naturalism of the modern novel, and I could not read enough of them. Steeped in new moods and ideas, I bought a ream of paper and tried to write, but nothing would come, or what did come was flat beyond telling. I discovered that more than the desire and feeling were necessary to write, and I dropped the idea. Yet I still wondered how it was possible to know people sufficiently to write about them. Could I ever learn about life and people? To me, with my vast ignorance, my Jim Crow station in life, it seemed a task impossible of achievement. I now knew what being a Negro meant. I could endure the hunger. I had learned to live with hate, but to feel that there were feelings denied me, that the very breath of life itself was beyond my reach, that more than anything else hurt, wounded me. I had a new hunger. In buoying me up, reading also cast me down, made me see what was possible, what I had missed. My tension returned, new, terrible, bitter, surging, almost too great to be contained. I no longer felt that the world about me was hostile, killing. I knew it. A million times I asked myself what I could do to save myself, and there were no answers. I seemed forever condemned, ringed by walls. I did not discuss my reading with Mr. Falk, who had lent me his library card. It would have meant talking about myself, and that would have been too painful. I smiled each day, fighting desperately to maintain my old behavior, to keep my disposition seemingly sunny. But some of the white men discerned that I had begun to brood. "Wake up there, boy," Mr. Olin said one day. "Sir?" I answered for the lack of a better word. "You act like you've stolen something." I laughed in the way I knew he expected me to laugh, but I resolved to be more conscious of myself, to watch my every act, to guard and hide the new knowledge that was dawning within me. If I went north, would it be possible for me to build a new life then? But how could a man build a life upon vague, unformed yearnings? I wanted to write, and I did not even know the English language. I bought English grammars and found them dull. I felt that I was getting a better sense of the language from novels than from grammars. I read hard, discarding a writer as soon as I felt that I had grasped his point of view. At night, the printed page stood before my eyes in sleep. Mrs. Moss, my landlady, asked me one Sunday morning, "Son, what is this you keep on reading?" "Oh, nothing, just novels." "What'd you get out of 'em?" "I'm just killing time." "I hope you know your own mind," she said in a tone which implied that she doubted if I had a mind. I knew of no Negroes who read the books I liked, and I wondered if any Negroes ever thought of them. I knew that there were Negro doctors, lawyers, newspapermen, but I never saw any of them. When I read a Negro newspaper, I never caught the faintest echo of my preoccupation in its pages. I felt trapped, and occasionally for a few days I would stop reading. But a vague hunger would come over me for books that opened up new avenues of feeling and seeing, and again I would forge another note to the white librarian. Again I would read and wonder, as only the naive and unlettered can read and wonder, feeling that I carried a secret, criminal burden about with me each day. That winter my mother and brother came and we set up housekeeping, buying furniture on the installment plan, being cheated and yet knowing no way to avoid it. I began to eat warm food and, to my surprise, found that regular meals enabled me to read faster. I may have lived through many illnesses and survived them, never suspecting that I was ill. My brother obtained a job and we began to save toward the trip north, plotting our time, setting tentative dates for departure. I told none of the white men on the job that I was planning to go north. I knew that the moment they felt I was thinking of the north, they would change toward me. It would have made them feel that I did not like the life I was living, and because my life was completely conditioned by what they said or did, it would have been tantamount to challenging them. I could calculate my chances for life in the South as a Negro fairly clearly now. I could fight the Southern whites by organizing with other Negroes as my grandfather had done, but I knew that I could never win that way. There were many whites and there were but few blacks. They were strong and we were weak. Outright rebellion could never win. If I fought openly, I would die, and I did not want to die. News of lynchings were frequent. I could submit and live the life of a genial slave, but that was impossible. All of my life had shaped me to live by my own feelings and thoughts. I could make up to Bess and marry her and inherit the house. But that too would be the life of a slave. If I did that, I would crush to death something within me, and I would hate myself as much as I knew the whites already hated those who had submitted. Neither could I ever willingly present myself to be kicked, as Shorty had done. I would rather have died than do that. I could drain off my restlessness by fighting with Shorty and Harrison. I had seen many Negroes solve the problem of being black by transferring their hatred of themselves to others with their black skin and fighting them. I would have to be cold to do that. And I was not cold, and I could never be. I could, of course, forget what I had read, thrust the whites out of my mind, forget them, and find release from anxiety and longing in sex and alcohol. But the memory of how my father had conducted himself made that course repugnant. If I did not want others to violate my life, how could I have voluntarily violated myself? I had no hope whatever of being a professional man. Not only had I been so conditioned that I did not desire it, but the fulfillment of such an ambition was beyond my capabilities. Well-to-do Negroes lived in a world that was almost as alien to me as the world inhabited by whites. What then was there? I held my life in my mind, in my consciousness each day, feeling at times that I would stumble and drop it, spill it forever. My reading had created a vast sense of distance between me and the world in which I lived and tried to make a living. And that sense of distance was increasing each day. My days and nights were one long, quiet, continuously contained dream of terror, tension, and anxiety. I wondered how long I could bear it. Chapter 14. The accidental visit of Aunt Maggie to Memphis formed a practical basis for my planning to go north. Aunt Maggie's husband, the uncle who had fled from Arkansas in the dead of night, had deserted her, and now she was casting about for a living. My mother, Aunt Maggie, my brother, and I held long conferences, speculating on the prospects of jobs and the cost of apartments in Chicago. And every time we conferred, we defeated ourselves. It was impossible for all four of us to go at once. We did not have enough money. Finally, sheer wish and hope prevailed over common sense and facts. We discovered that if we waited until we were prepared to go, we would never leave. We would never amass enough money to see us through. We would have to gamble. We finally decided that Aunt Maggie and I would go first, even though it was winter, and prepare a place for my mother and brother. Why wait until next week or next month? If we were going, why not go at once? Next loomed the problem of leaving my job cleanly, smoothly, without arguments or scenes. How could I present the fact of leaving to my boss? Yes, I would pose as an innocent boy. I would tell him that my aunt was taking me and my paralyzed mother to Chicago. That would create in his mind the impression that I was not asserting my will. It would block any expression of dislike on his part for my act. I knew that Southern whites hated the ideas of Negroes leaving to live in places where the racial atmosphere was different. It worked as I had planned. When I broke the news of my leaving 2 days before I left, I was afraid to tell it sooner for the fear that I would create hostility on the part of the whites with whom I worked. The boss leaned back in his swivel chair and gave me the longest and most considerate look he had ever given me. "Chicago," he repeated softly. "Yes, sir." Boy, you won't like it up there. Well, I have to go where my family is, sir. The other white office workers paused in their task and listened. I grew self-conscious, tense. It's cold up there, he said. Yes, sir, they say it is, I said, keeping my voice in a neutral tone. He became conscious that I was watching him, and he looked away, laughing uneasily to cover his concern and dislike. Now, boy, don't you go up there and fall into that lake. Oh, no, sir, I said, smiling as though there existed the possibility of my falling accidentally into Lake Michigan. He was serious again, staring at me. I looked at the floor. You think you'll do any better up there? He asked. I don't know, sir. You seem to have been getting along all right down here. Oh, yes, sir. If it wasn't for my mother's going, I'd stay right here and work. I lied as earnestly as possible. Well, why not stay? You can send her money, he suggested. He had trapped me. I knew that staying now would never do. I could not have controlled my relations with the whites if I had remained after having told them that I wanted to go north. Well, I want to be with my mother. You want to be with your mother, he repeated idly. Well, Richard, we enjoyed having you here with us. And I enjoyed working here, I lied. There was silence. I stood awkwardly, then moved to the door. There was still silence. White faces were looking strangely at me. I went upstairs feeling like a criminal. The word soon spread through the factory, and the white men looked at me with new eyes. It came to me. So you're going north, huh? Yes, sir. My family's taking me with them. The north's no good for your people, boy. I'll try to get along, sir. Don't believe all the stories you hear about the north. No, sir, I don't. You'll come back here where your friends are. Well, sir, I don't know. How are you going to act up there? Just like I act down here, sir. When you speak to a white girl up there? Oh, no, sir. I'll act there just like I act here. I know you won't. You'll change. Niggas change when they go north. I wanted to tell him that I was going north precisely to change, but I did not. I'll be the same, I said, trying to indicate that I had no imagination whatever. As I talked, I felt that I was acting out a dream. I did not want to lie, yet I had to lie to conceal what I felt. A white censor was standing over me, and like dreams forming a curtain for the safety of sleep, so did my lies form a screen of safety for my living moments. Boy, I bet you've been reading too many of them damn books. Oh, no, sir. I made my last errand to the post office, put my bag away, washed my hands, and pulled on my cap. I shot a quick glance about the factory. Most of the men were working late. One or two looked up. Mr. Falk, to whom I had returned my library card, gave me a quick, secret smile. I walked to the elevator and rode down with the shorty. You lucky bastard, he said bitterly. Why'd you say that? You saved your goddamn money and now you're gone. My problems are just starting, I said. You'll never have any problems as hard as the ones you had here, he said. I hope not, but life is tricky. Sometimes I get so goddamn mad I want to kill everybody. He spat in a rage. You can leave. I'll never leave this goddamn South, he railed. I'm always saying I am, but I won't. I'm lazy. I like to sleep too goddamn much. I'll die here, or maybe they'll kill me. I stepped from the elevator into the street, half expecting someone to call me back and tell me that it was all a dream, that I was not leaving. This was the culture from which I sprang. This was the terror from which I fled. The next day, when I was already in full flight, aboard a northward-bound train, I could not have accounted, if it had been demanded of me, for all the varied forces that were making me reject the culture that had molded and shaped me. I was leaving without a qualm, without a single backward glance. The face of the South that I had known was hostile and forbidding, and yet, out of all the conflicts and the curses, the blows and the anger, the tension and the terror, I had somehow gotten the idea that life could be different, could be lived in a fuller and richer manner, as had happened when I had fled the orphan home. I was now running more away from something than towards something, but that did not matter to me. My mood was, I've got to get away. I can't stay here. But what was it that always made me feel that way? What was it that made me conscious of possibilities? From where in this southern darkness had I caught a sense of freedom? Why was it that I was able to act upon vaguely felt notions? What was it that made me feel things deeply enough for me to try to order my life by my feelings? The external world of whites and blacks, which was the only world that I had ever known, surely had not evoked in me any belief in myself. The people I had met had advised and demanded submission. What then was I after? How dare I consider my feelings superior to the gross environment that sought to claim me? It had been only through books, at best no more than vicarious cultural transfusions, that I had managed to keep myself alive in a negatively vital way. Whenever my environment had failed to support or nourish me, I had clutched at books. Consequently, my belief in books had risen more out of a sense of desperation than from any abiding conviction of their ultimate value. In a peculiar sense, life had trapped me in a realm of emotional rejection. I had not embraced insurgency through open choice. Existing emotionally on the sheer, thin margin of Southern culture, I had felt that nothing short of life itself hung upon each of my actions and decisions, and I had grown used to change, to movement, to making many adjustments. In the main, my hope was merely a kind of self-defense, a conviction that if I did not leave, I would perish, either because of possible violence of others against me, or because of my possible violence against them. The substance of my hope was formless and devoid of any real sense of direction, for in my southern living, I had seen no looming landmark by which I could, in a positive sense, guide my daily actions. The shocks of southern living had rendered my personality tender and swollen, tense and volatile, and my flight was more a shunning of external and internal dangers than an attempt to embrace what I felt I wanted. It had been my accidental reading of fiction and literary criticism that had evoked in me vague glimpses of life's possibilities. Of course, I had never seen or met the men who wrote the books I read, and the kind of world in which they lived was as alien to me as the moon. But what enabled me to overcome my chronic distrust was that these mere books, written by men like Dreiser, Masters, Mencken, Anderson, and Lewis, seemed defensively critical of the straitened American environment. These writers seemed to feel that America could be shaped nearer to the hearts of those who lived in it, and it was out of these novels and stories and articles, out of the emotional impact of imaginative constructions of heroic or tragic deeds, that I felt touching my face a tinge of warmth from an unseen light, and in my leaving I was groping toward that invisible light, always trying to keep my face so set and turned that I would not lose the hope of its faint promise, using it as my justification for action. The white South said that it knew niggers, and I was what the white South called a nigger. Well, the white South had never known me, never known what I thought, what I felt. The white South said that I had a place in life. Well, I had never felt my place, or rather, my deepest instincts had always made me reject the place to which the white South had assigned me. It had never occurred to me that I was in any way an inferior being, and no word that I had ever heard fall from the lips of Southern white men had ever made me really doubt the worth of my own humanity. True, I had lied, I had stolen, I had struggled to contain my seething anger, I had fought, and it was perhaps a mere accident that I had never killed. But in what other ways had the South allowed me to be natural, to be real, to be myself, except in rejection, rebellion, and aggression? Not only had the Southern whites not known me, but more important still, as I had lived in the South, I had not had the chance to learn who I was. The pressure of Southern living kept me from being the kind of person that I might have been. I had been what my surroundings had demanded, what my family, conforming to the dictates of the whites above them, had exacted of me, and what the whites had said that I must be. Never being fully able to be myself, I had slowly learned that the South could recognize but a part of a man, could accept but a fragment of his personality, and all the rest, the best and deepest things of the heart and mind, were tossed away in blind ignorance and hate. I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown, to meet other situations that would perhaps elicit from me other responses. And if I could meet enough of a different life, then perhaps gradually and slowly I might learn who I was, what I might be. I was not leaving the South to forget the South, but so that some day I might understand it, might come to know what its rigors had done to me, to its children. I fled so that the numbness of my defensive living might thaw out and let me feel the pain, years later and far away, of what living in the South had meant. Yet, deep down, I knew that I could never really leave the South, for my feelings had already been formed by the South, for there had been slowly instilled into my personality and consciousness, black though I was, the culture of the South. So, in leaving, I was taking a part of the South to transplant in alien soil, to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom. And if that miracle ever happened, then I would know that there was yet hope in that southern swamp of despair and violence, that light could emerge even out of the blackest of the southern night. I would know that the South, too, could overcome its fear, its hate, its cowardice, its heritage of guilt and blood, its burden of anxiety and compulsive cruelty. With ever watchful eyes and bearing scars, visible and invisible, I headed north, full of a hazy notion that life could be lived with dignity, that the personalities of others should not be violated, that men should be able to confront other men without fear or shame, and that if men were lucky in their living on earth, they might win some redeeming meaning for their having struggled and suffered here beneath the stars. End of chapter 14. End of Richard Wright, Black Boy.